The taste of copper and ozone still haunts my mouth from when I first heard my own voice echo back from polished steel. My name is Interrogator Matthias Corvin, Ordo Hereticus, and I've spent 23 years hunting the enemies of mankind. I thought I understood corruption, the obvious kinds that rot flesh and twist bone. You think that makes me paranoid, but you don't know what I've seen in the reflection chambers of Hive Tertius. The real horror isn't the demons that scream and rage. It's the ones that whisper with your own voice, wearing your own face, speaking truths you've never told anyone. When the mirror answers back, when your reflection moves independently, when it knows things only you should know, that's when you realize the warp doesn't just corrupt from without. Sometimes, the greatest enemy is the one staring back at you, wearing your skin like a perfectly fitted mask. Chapter 1. The Interrogator's Beginning. The servo skulls hummed their mechanical prayers as I descended into the bowels of Hive Tertius, their red optical lenses casting dancing shadows against the adamantium walls. 23 years of service to the Emperor's Inquisition had taught me to read the subtle signs of corruption, but nothing had prepared me for what waited in Investigation Cell Omega-7. The air tasted of recycled breath and fear. Standard atmospheric processors maintained exactly 21.3% oxygen content. I'd checked the readings twice. Everything by the book. Everything according to protocol. That's how we survived in the Inquisition. Rigid adherence to procedure, unwavering faith, and the absolute certainty that humanity's enemies could be identified, categorized, and eliminated. My boots echoed against the metal grating as I approached the observation chamber. Through the reinforced armor glass, I could see the subject, a middle-aged woman, designation citizen, 7749 Alpha, suspected of harboring unsanctioned psychic abilities. She sat perfectly still in the center of a featureless white room, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the polished steel plate mounted on the far wall. "Status report," I commanded, not looking away from the woman. Adept Vex, my assigned tech priest, responded with his characteristic mechanical precision. Subject has remained motionless for 6 hours, 14 minutes, 37 seconds. No measurable psychic emanations. However, he paused, his voxcaster crackling with static. There have been irregularities. The mirror, interrogator. Every 17 minutes and 43 seconds, the subject's reflection moves independently for exactly 12 seconds. Our picked recorders capture nothing. Our Auspex readings show no anomalies. Yet 17 members of the observation staff have reported identical phenomena. I felt the familiar cold weight settle in my stomach, the sensation that had kept me alive through 2 decades of hunting heretics, witches, and worse. Something was wrong here. Fundamentally wrong in a way that defied easy explanation. Has she spoken? Once. When first placed in the chamber, she looked directly at the mirror and said, "Hello, Matthias. I've been waiting for you." The chill spread from my stomach to my limbs. The woman had been arrested 3 days ago in the Underhive. I had only been assigned to her case this morning. There was no possible way she could have known my name, let alone that I would be observing her. Play back the recording. Adept Vex's mechadendrites interfaced with the control console, and the chamber's audio feed filled the observation room. For 6 hours of recording, there was nothing but the soft hum of ventilation systems and the woman's steady breathing. No words, no greeting, nothing. The recording shows no vocalization at timestamp E0347 when the greeting was reported, Vex explained. I studied the woman through the armor glass. She appeared unremarkable. Brown hair streaked with grey, weathered hands that spoke of manual labor, clothing that marked her as a mid-hive factory worker. Her background? Helene Voss, age 47. Worked in Promethium Refinery 23 for 18 years. No criminal record, no known associations with heretical cults or unsanctioned psychers. Reported by her supervisor for talking to herself during work shifts. When questioned, she claimed she was having conversations with her reflection, Standard procedure would be a simple psychic evaluation followed by either sanctioning or termination, depending on the results. But the anomalies surrounding this woman suggested something far more complex than a simple case of uncontrolled psychic emergence. I'm going in. Interrogator. Regulations clearly state that initial contact with suspected psychers should be conducted remotely until... The heavy blast doors slid apart with a pneumatic hiss, revealing the sterile white interior. The woman, Helene Voss, hadn't moved, but as I stepped across the threshold, her reflection in the steel mirror turned to look at me. The woman herself remained perfectly still, staring straight ahead. My hand instinctively moved to the bolt pistol at my hip, but I forced myself to maintain composure. Hallucinations were a common side effect of warp exposure. Seeing things that weren't there was often the first sign that corruption had taken hold. I had been in this business too long to panic at shadows. "Citizen Voss," I said, my voice carrying the authority of the Golden Throne. The woman's reflection smiled in the mirror, though her actual face remained expressionless. The woman herself said nothing. Her lips didn't move. But in the polished steel, my own reflection spoke with perfect clarity, using my voice to repeat the greeting that 17 observers had reported. Heretics who spoke with the voices of angels, and psychers who could turn a man's own thoughts against him. This was simply another manifestation of warp taint, nothing more. "Citizen Voss, you will cease any psychic manipulation immediately and submit to examination." "Oh, Matthias, you still don't understand. I'm not manipulating anything." The temperature in the room remained a constant 21.7 degrees Celsius. The atmospheric composition was unchanged. Every rational measurement indicated that nothing supernatural was occurring. Yet I was having a conversation with my own reflection, while the suspected psyker sat silent and motionless. You taste it every time you're about to discover something that will change everything you think you know. That detail, the specific taste of fear that I had never described to anyone, sent ice through my veins. But I had been trained for this. It proved nothing except that I was dealing with a more sophisticated threat than initially assessed. "Adept Vex," I spoke into my microbead without taking my eyes off the mirror. "Initiate Psi Suppression Protocol 7, full spectral dampening." The chamber filled with the high-pitched whine of psychic suppression fields activating. Null field generators built into the walls powered up, creating a localized dead zone where no psychic phenomena should be able to manifest. The woman should have collapsed immediately if she was channeling warp energy. Helene Voss remained unchanged, but in the mirror, my reflection doubled over in apparent agony, clutching its head as though the null fields were causing it physical pain. "That hurts," it gasped in my voice. "But it won't stop this. You can't suppress something that's already inside you." The null fields were working. Whatever was happening was being affected by the psychic dampeners, which meant it was definitely warp-related. But the fact that the woman herself showed no reaction suggested the phenomenon wasn't originating from her. I drew my bolt pistol and aimed it at the mirror. "End this manipulation, or I will destroy the focal point." "Go ahead," my reflection said, straightening despite the ongoing psychic suppression. "Break the mirror. See what happens when you shatter the only thing standing between us." My finger hesitated on the trigger. Something about the reflection's tone, the confidence with which it spoke, suggested that destroying the mirror might not end the manifestation, but rather unleash something worse. "Who are you?" I demanded. "I'm you, Matthias, the real you, the one who remembers what happened in the Chalice sector, the one who knows why you really joined the Inquisition, the one who's been waiting 23 years for you to stop running from the truth." The Chalice sector. A cold knot formed in my stomach as memories I had buried deep began to surface. My first assignment as an acolyte. The investigation that had gone wrong. The reason I had requested a memory wipe from the Inquisition's sanctioned psychers. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. You remember the mirrors in the heretic temple. You remember looking into them and seeing yourself, but not yourself. The version of you that had already been corrupted. The version that spoke with demons and bargained with entities from beyond the veil. I forced myself to focus on the present. Memory manipulation was a common tactic of chaos entities. They would dig into a person's past, find moments of doubt or trauma, and twist them into weapons. I would not be broken by psychological warfare. Your lies have no power over me, demon. Demon? The reflection laughed again. Oh, Matthias, I'm not a demon. I'm not even from the warp. I'm from right here, in this reality, in this timeline, in this very moment. I'm the you that exists on the other side of every mirror you've ever looked into. The you that's been watching you make the same mistakes for 23 years. The woman suddenly stood, her movement so abrupt that I instinctively trained my weapon on her. But she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the mirror, and for the first time since I'd entered the chamber, she spoke. "He's almost ready," she said in a voice like distant thunder. "The convergence is beginning." In the mirror, my reflection nodded. "Thank you, Helen. Your service to the truth will not be forgotten." The psychic suppression fields were operating at maximum power, but whatever was happening in this room was beyond their ability to contain. I had encountered possession, psychic manifestation, and demonic incursion, but this felt different. This felt like something was fundamentally wrong with reality itself. "Interrogator," Adept Vex's voice crackled through my microbead. "We're detecting massive space-time distortions throughout the chamber. The readings are impossible." Define impossible. The room appears to exist in 17 different dimensional configurations simultaneously. Our instruments are detecting versions of you and the subject in at least 43 parallel states. I looked at Helene Voss, who was still staring at the mirror with an expression of religious reverence. Then I looked at my reflection, which was looking back at me with something that might have been pity. "What are you?" I asked again. "I'm what you'll become," it said simply. "When you finally stop fighting the truth and accept what you really are, what you've always been, what you became the moment you looked into that first mirror in the Chalice sector and saw something looking back." The memory came flooding back, despite the psychic conditioning that should have kept it buried. The heretic temple, the mirrors that showed not reflections but other realities. The moment I had seen myself, another version of myself, working alongside the very heretics I had been sent to apprehend. "That was a vision," I said. "A trick of the warp." "Was it? Then explain this." My reflection gestured to the chamber around us. "Explain why every case you investigate ends with mirrors. Explain why you can always taste copper and ozone before the truth comes out. Explain why you've never failed to find the heretics you hunt. Because I'm good at my job. Because you already know where they are. Because you've been one of them all along." Chapter 2. First Signs. The emergency klaxons were screaming by the time I made it back to the observation chamber. Adept Vex's mechadendrites flailed frantically across multiple control consoles, while servo skulls swirled overhead like agitated birds. Through the armor glass, I could see that Investigation Cell Omega-7 had transformed into something that violated several laws of physics. "Report!" I barked, though part of me already knew the answer would defy rational explanation. "The chamber is experiencing what I can only describe as dimensional cascading," Vex replied, his usually calm mechanical voice edged with something approaching panic. "Reality appears to be fragmenting." I pressed against the viewing window and immediately wished I hadn't. The white cell now contained not one, but dozens of versions of itself, each slightly different from the others. In some, the walls were covered with arcane symbols. In others, the steel mirror had multiplied into an entire wall of reflective surfaces. In one horrifying variation, the chamber was filled with corpses, all wearing my face. How many Helene Voss variants are we tracking? 17 confirmed, though the number fluctuates. In most timelines, she appears to be conducting some form of ritual. In others, Vex paused, recalculating. In others, Interrogator, you are the one performing the ritual. The copper taste was stronger now, accompanied by a sound like distant chanting that seemed to emanate from inside my own skull. I activated my personal Auspex scanner and immediately regretted it. The readings showed that I was somehow present in 43 of the dimensional variants simultaneously. "Sir," came the voice of scribe militant Hadron over the Vox, "we've received reports from 17 other Inquisition facilities across the sector. All report identical phenomena: mirrors becoming active, reflections moving independently, and subjects claiming to be in communication with alternate versions of themselves." The scope of what we were dealing with began to crystallize in my mind. This wasn't an isolated incident of psychic manifestation. This was sector-wide, possibly galaxy-wide. Something fundamental about the nature of reality was breaking down. "Orders from the Ordos?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "All facilities are to maintain current containment protocols pending arrival of specialized investigation teams. Estimated arrival time: 6 standard days." 6 days. In 6 days, whatever was happening would either resolve itself or escalate beyond our ability to contain it. Given what I was seeing in the observation chamber, I strongly suspected the latter. I needed answers, and I needed them now, which meant returning to the chamber and confronting whatever entity was wearing my face in the mirror. "Adept Vex, can you isolate specific dimensional variants?" "Theoretically, yes. Our Geller field generators could be reconfigured to create localized reality bubbles. However, the process would be extremely dangerous. If the field collapsed while you were inside, I'd be scattered across 43 different timelines simultaneously." "Understood. Do it anyway." The next 30 minutes were filled with frantic preparation. Vex and his tech-adept subordinates reconfigured the chamber's containment systems, turning them from psychic suppressors into dimensional stabilizers. I donned a modified void suit equipped with personal Geller field generators, technology normally reserved for warp travel, now repurposed to maintain my existence in a single timeline. "Field integrity at maximum," Vex reported. "You should have approximately 23 minutes before the generators overheat. I strongly advise against exceeding this time limit." I checked the chronometer on my wrist. 23 minutes to get answers from an entity that claimed to be me, but clearly possessed knowledge I didn't have. 23 minutes to understand what was happening before it spread beyond our ability to control it. The chamber door hissed open, and I stepped into madness. Reality was unstable here. I could see through the walls to other versions of the chamber, other versions of myself having similar conversations with other versions of my reflection. Some of those conversations appeared to be friendly. Helene Voss was exactly where I had left her, sitting in the center of the room, staring at the mirror. But now I could see that she wasn't alone. Ghostly after-images of other versions of herself flickered around her, like a photographic double exposure. "You came back," said my reflection as I approached the mirror. "I wasn't sure you would." "I want answers." "Good. Because you're finally ready to hear the truth. The real truth, not the comfortable lies you've been telling yourself for 23 years. I activated my recording equipment, though I doubted it would capture anything useful given the dimensional instability. "What are you? And what am I?" "A bridge," the reflection said simply. "A point of connection between realities. You've been unconsciously creating these dimensional tiers your entire career, Matthias. Every time you investigate a case involving mirrors, reflective surfaces, or reality distortion, you're actually investigating yourself." The implications of what it was saying crashed over me like a tide of ice water. That's impossible. Is it? Think about your success rate. 97% of your investigations result in successful identification and elimination of heretical threats. Do you know what the average success rate is for Inquisition interrogators? But now, looking back through 23 years of perfect intuition and impossible luck, I began to see another pattern. Every case you've solved, you've known the answer before you started investigating. My reflection continued. You always knew where to look, who to question, what to ask, because in some other reality, some other version of you had already solved it. The information bleeds through. Even if that were true, it doesn't explain this. I gestured around the chamber. It doesn't explain why reality is falling apart, because something is trying to force a convergence. All the different versions of you, all the different timelines, are being pulled together, and at the center of it all, the reflection's expression grew grave. At the center is the version of you that made a deal with something that should never have been contacted. The chanting in my skull grew louder, and I realized it wasn't random noise. It was a specific incantation, words in a language that predated human civilization. Words I somehow understood despite never having learned them. "The Chalice Sector," I said, the memory coming back with crystal clarity despite the psychic conditioning. "I remember now. We found a temple built around a sphere of perfect mirrors. Each one showed a different reality. And in one of them, you saw yourself already corrupted, already working with the heretics, already in communion with entities from outside normal space-time." My reflection leaned closer to the surface of the mirror. "But that wasn't a vision of a possible future, Matthias. That was a window into what was happening right then, in another universe. You saw yourself performing the same ritual you're going to perform in approximately 18 minutes. My chronometer confirmed it. I had been in the chamber for 5 minutes, leaving 18 before the Geller field generators overheated. But how could my reflection possibly know the exact timing? "Because I've seen this before," it answered my unspoken question. "I've watched it happen in 17 different realities, and in every single one, you make the same choice." "What choice?" "To complete the convergence, to merge all the realities into one, to become what you were always meant to be." I looked around the chamber, seeing the dozens of dimensional variants overlaying each other like translucent photographs. In some, I was already performing incomprehensible rituals. In others, I was fighting against versions of myself. And in one terrifying glimpse, I saw myself seated on a throne made of mirrors, with entities of impossible geometry kneeling before me. "Why?" I asked. "Why would I do that?" "Because it's the only way to stop what's coming. The real threat, Matthias. The thing that the Inquisition, the Imperium, even the Emperor himself doesn't know about. There's something stirring in the deep warp, something that makes chaos look like a minor inconvenience. And the only way to fight it is to become something more than human." The Geller field generators were beginning to whine with strain. Reality around me flickered like a dying pict screen. I could feel myself being pulled in multiple directions simultaneously as different timelines tried to claim me. 15 minutes, Vex's voice crackled through my comm. "Field integrity at 78% and declining." I looked at Helene Voss, who had remained motionless throughout this entire conversation. "What's her role in this?" "She's an anchor point, a person whose existence is identical across all realities. Having her here stabilizes the convergence process. Without her," my reflection shrugged. "Without her, you'd be torn apart by dimensional stress before you could complete the transformation. And if I refuse? If I walk out of here and destroy this entire facility? Then the convergence happens anyway, but without control. Reality collapses into chaos. Billions die. And eventually, what emerges from the wreckage is something far worse than what I'm offering you." I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me like a physical force. Continue down this path and become something inhuman, but possibly save the galaxy. Refuse and potentially doom everything I had sworn to protect. "Show me," I said. "Show me what I become." The mirror's surface rippled like water, and suddenly I was looking not at my reflection, but through a window into another reality. I saw myself, or a version of myself, standing in the center of a vast chamber filled with impossible geometry. My other self wore robes that seemed to be cut from space itself, and when he moved, reality bent around him like a gravitational field. But it was still recognizably me. The face was the same, the mannerisms familiar. And when this other version of myself looked directly back at me through the mirror, I saw something I didn't expect. Sanity This wasn't a chaos-corrupted madman. This was someone who had made a calculated decision and retained enough of his humanity to remember why. "You understand now," my reflection said. "This isn't about power or corruption. This is about evolution, about becoming something capable of fighting threats that exist outside normal reality. The cost is exactly what you've already paid. Your humanity was forfeit the moment you first looked into a mirror in the Chalice sector and saw something looking back. All I'm offering is to make that sacrifice meaningful." The chronometer showed 12 minutes remaining. Around me, the dimensional variants were becoming more stable, as if my consideration of the choice was itself affecting reality. I could see versions of myself making the same decision in timeline after timeline. But I could also see something else. In the furthest, most distorted reflection, I glimpsed what my reflection claimed was coming. A thing of hunger and void that existed in the spaces between realities. Something that fed on existence itself and left nothing but empty space in its wake. "How long?" I asked. "How long before this thing arrives?" "In this timeline? Approximately 43 years. But in others, it's already here. It's working its way through the realities like a plague, consuming everything. And once it finds a way to enter normal space-time." I understood. This wasn't just about my personal fate, or even the fate of humanity. This was about the survival of reality itself. And if the only way to fight something that existed outside normal physics was to become something equally impossible. "What do I need to do?" My reflection smiled, but there was no triumph in it, only grim satisfaction. "First, you need to understand what you really are. Then, you need to remember what you forgot. And finally, you need to choose which reality deserves to continue existing." The field generators were screaming now. Reality was becoming increasingly unstable as 43 different versions of this moment tried to exist simultaneously. I could feel myself being stretched across dimensions like a piece of taffy. Chapter 3. Truth glimpsed. The moment I decided to trust my reflection, reality snapped into focus with the violence of a breaking bone. The dimensional variance collapsed into a single timeline. But instead of relief, I felt only the terrible clarity of absolute knowledge flooding into my consciousness. I remembered everything. The Chalice sector investigation had never been about hunting heretics. It had been about me. The entire operation, my assignment, the team composition, even the specific temple we'd discovered, had been orchestrated by entities operating outside normal space-time. They had been cultivating me for this moment since before I was born. "The taste of copper and ozone," I whispered, understanding flooding through me. "It's not fear, it's dimensional bleed-through. I taste it every time realities touch." My reflection nodded solemnly. "Now you begin to understand. Every investigation, every success, every moment of perfect intuition, you've been unconsciously accessing information from alternate timelines. The Inquisition trained you to hunt heretics, but what you really became was a living bridge between worlds." Helene Voss stood and turned to face me for the first time since I'd entered the chamber. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that shouldn't have been possible from human vocal cords. "He's ready for the next phase," she said, but I could hear 17 different versions of her voice speaking in 17 different languages, all saying the same thing. "The convergence can begin." "Adept Vex," I spoke into my microbead, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Evacuate all personnel from this level. Seal the blast doors. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, do not attempt to interfere. Interrogator, the field generators are at critical..." "I know. Trust me, Vex. And whatever you see in the recordings, remember that some sacrifices are necessary to preserve the greater good." I switched off my comm system and faced the mirror again. My reflection was no longer alone. Standing beside it was another figure I recognized with growing dread. Myself, but older, wearing the star-shot robes I had seen earlier. This version of me radiated power that made my teeth ache. "Matthias Prime," said my reflection. Meet Matthias Omega, the version of you that completed the transformation 43 years ago. The older version of myself stepped closer to the mirror's surface, and I realized he wasn't actually a reflection at all. He was real, existing in the same space, but displaced by dimensional phasing. When he spoke, reality rippled around his words. "You're about to ask why," Matthias Omega said in a voice that sounded like distant thunder. "Why allow yourself to be manipulated? Why cooperate with entities that exist outside human understanding? Why sacrifice everything you've believed in?" "Because the alternative is worse," I said, the knowledge flowing into my consciousness without conscious thought. "Because there's something coming that will devour reality itself, and the only way to fight it is to become something equally impossible." Correct, but incomplete. Matthias Omega gestured, and the air around him filled with images, glimpses of other realities, other timelines, other versions of the crisis we faced. "Show him, Helene." Helene Voss raised her hands, and suddenly I could see through her eyes across 43 different timelines simultaneously. In most of them, reality was ending, not with the fire and fury of chaos corruption, but with simple emptiness, stars going out one by one, planets becoming empty spheres of dead matter, life itself being consumed by something that existed in the spaces between atoms. "The null entity," Matthias Omega explained, "a consciousness from outside our local cluster of realities. It feeds on existence itself, converting matter and energy into pure void. In most timelines, it arrives without warning and consumes everything in approximately 6 months. But not all timelines," I said, seeing the pattern in Helene's visions. "In exactly 7 realities, something fights back. Something that exists outside normal physical law, but still maintains enough connection to humanity to care about preserving it. In those timelines, the null entity is contained, trapped, eventually destroyed. I saw myself, or versions of myself, standing against impossible geometries of hunger and void. But I wasn't human anymore. I was something that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Something that could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality like a sculptor working with clay." "The transformation process," I said. "Show me." My reflection stepped aside as the mirror's surface began to display memories that weren't mine. Or rather, memories that were mine but from realities I had never lived in. I watched myself undergo changes that should have been horrifying, but somehow felt natural, inevitable. First came the expansion of consciousness. My awareness stretched across multiple timelines simultaneously, allowing me to perceive threats and opportunities that existed outside normal space-time. Then came the physical changes, my body becoming a focal point for dimensional energy, my nervous system adapting to process information from 43 different realities at once. But the most significant change was psychological. I watched myself let go of individual human concerns, personal relationships, creature comfort, the small daily pleasures that make life worth living, and embrace a perspective that spanned entire galaxies and multiple dimensions. "I become a god," I said quietly. "No," Matthias Omega corrected. "You become a guardian. Gods create. What you become is something that protects creation from things that shouldn't exist." "And the cost? Everything that makes you human. Your ability to relate to individual people, your capacity for simple pleasure, your connection to linear time, but you retain the core of what makes you you, your dedication to protecting humanity, your willingness to sacrifice for the greater good, your refusal to surrender in the face of impossible odds." I looked around the chamber, seeing it now with enhanced perception. The dimensional stress was spreading beyond this facility. Across the sector, reality was becoming unstable as the convergence process began. Other versions of myself were making the same choice in other realities, and their decisions were affecting this one. "How long do we have?" I asked. "In this timeline." 4 days before the null entity breaches the dimensional barriers. 3 days before reality becomes too unstable to support the transformation process. 2 days before the Inquisition arrives with exterminatus protocols to contain what they perceive as a massive warp incursion. The irony was bitter. The organization I had served faithfully for 23 years would destroy me and everyone on this world rather than allow the transformation that might save the galaxy. They would do it believing they were preventing corruption, never understanding they were ensuring humanity's extinction. "There is another way," said Helene Voss, her voice now clearly carrying the harmonic resonance of multiple realities. "But it requires a level of sacrifice that even we are reluctant to ask." "Explain." Matthias Omega gestured again, and the air filled with new images. I saw myself not undergoing transformation alone, but serving as a focal point for a group transformation. Dozens of individuals from across the sector, all with the same dimensional sensitivity that had marked me as different, all volunteering to become something more than human. "A collective ascension," I breathed. "Distribute the burden among multiple consciousnesses. The individuals retain more of their humanity, but the process is far less stable. The risk of catastrophic failure increases exponentially with each additional participant, and the entities required to facilitate such a transformation." Matthias Omega's expression grew grim. "Let's say they demand a higher price than those that would transform you alone." I could see the logic of both approaches. Solo transformation would certainly work, but would leave me so far beyond human that I might lose sight of what I was trying to protect. Group transformation would preserve more humanity, but came with massive risks. "What price?" I asked. "Memory," Helene answered. "All participants forget their human lives completely. They become protectors of humanity while losing all connection to what humanity actually means. They become perfect guardians and utterly alien intelligences simultaneously." The weight of the decision was staggering. Transform alone and risk becoming a god who no longer understands mortals. Transform as a group and risk becoming something that protects humanity for purely abstract reasons. Is there no third option? "There is," said my reflection quietly. "But you're not going to like it." The mirror's surface rippled again, showing me visions of a different kind of transformation. I saw myself maintaining human form while serving as a conscious link between realities. I remained essentially human, but became a permanent conduit for dimensional energy, allowing other versions of myself to exist simultaneously in this reality. "Living multiplicity," Matthias Omega explained. "You remain yourself, but you share your existence with alternate versions from other timelines. 43 consciousnesses in one body, all working together to fight the null entity. The strain on a single human mind is enormous. Most attempts result in complete psychological fragmentation within hours. But if successful, it creates something unprecedented. A being with godlike power that retains complete human perspective and motivation." I could feel time running out. The Gellerfield generators were beginning to fail, and dimensional stress was building throughout the facility. Soon, the choice would be made for me as reality collapsed into chaos. "What would you do?" I asked Matthias Omega. "I chose solo transformation," he replied. "And I've spent 43 years fighting the null entity while slowly forgetting why human life has value. I have saved countless realities, but I can no longer remember what I loved about the people I was saving." "I chose group transformation," said another voice. I turned to see yet another version of myself stepping through dimensional space into the chamber. This one wore the robes of an inquisitor, but radiated power that distorted light around him. We stopped the null entity, but in the process, we became something so alien that humanity fears us as much as any chaos incursion. "And the third option has never been attempted," both alternate selves said simultaneously. "The risks are too great, the chance of success too small." I looked at my chronometer. 1 minute, 17 seconds before field collapse. Time for one final question. If I refuse all transformation and allow events to proceed naturally? The mirror showed me the answer without words. Reality consuming itself. The galaxy becoming an empty void. Every human who had ever lived or ever would live simply ceasing to exist as the null entity fed on the fundamental forces that allowed matter to cohere. No choice at all, really. "I need volunteers," I said. People with dimensional sensitivity. People willing to risk everything for a chance to save humanity while remaining human enough to remember why humanity is worth saving. Already arranged, Helene Voss said, gesturing toward the chamber doors. They opened to reveal 17 individuals in Inquisition uniforms, all wearing the expression of people who had seen too much and decided to act anyway. I recognized some of them. Adept Vex, his mechanical augmentations sparking with dimensional energy. Scribe Militant Hadron, her eyes reflecting light that existed in 17 different spectrums simultaneously. Guard Sergeant Kruger, standing at attention despite reality warping around him like heat distortion. "We know the risks, sir," Kruger said. "We've all seen the alternatives. If there's a chance to save humanity while staying human, we're willing to take it." 37 seconds. "Are you certain?" I asked. "This isn't just death we're risking. It's something far worse." "With respect, sir," Vex's mechanical voice carried harmonics of absolute certainty. "We've been fighting the enemies of humanity our entire careers. If we have to become something else to continue that fight, so be it. But if we can remain ourselves while doing it." 23 seconds. I looked at my reflection one final time. It was smiling, but the expression carried sadness as well as approval. "Begin the convergence," I said. 17 seconds. Reality exploded into infinite possibility. Chapter 4. Nightmare Unleashed. The transformation began with the sound of breaking glass, but the glass was reality itself, and the sound came from inside my bones. 18 volunteers stood in a circle around Helene Voss, while dimensional energy poured through the chamber like liquid lightning, and I felt my consciousness fracture into 43 separate awareness streams, all trying to exist in the same skull. Pain doesn't adequately describe what happened next. Pain is a human sensation, limited by human neurology and human understanding of suffering. What I experienced was the agony of existence itself being rewritten at a quantum level, while 17 other people shared the experience through our growing psychic link. Through the expanding web of consciousness that connected us all, I felt Adept Vex's surprise as his mechanical augmentations began interfacing directly with dimensional space. His servo skulls transformed into impossible geometric shapes that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, their pict recorders now capturing information from multiple realities at once. Scribe Militant Hadron's transformation was even more dramatic. Her decades of accumulated knowledge began accessing information from alternate timelines, allowing her to understand languages that had never been spoken and technologies that had never been invented. She screamed as 43 lifetimes of learning tried to cram themselves into her neural pathways simultaneously. But the most terrifying change was happening to Guard Sergeant Kruger. His simple, straightforward soldier's mentality was expanding to encompass strategic thinking that spanned multiple galaxies and temporal paradoxes. I could feel his confusion and growing horror as he realized he was becoming something that could plan military campaigns across 17 different realities. "Hold together," I managed to say through gritted teeth as dimensional energy rewrote my nervous system. "Remember what we're fighting for. Remember why we're human." The answer came from all 18 of us simultaneously. To protect those who cannot protect themselves. That shared purpose became our anchor as reality continued to tear itself apart around us. Helene Voss stood at the center of our circle, her form now clearly visible as something that had never been entirely human. She was a living focal point for dimensional energy, her existence simultaneously present in every reality where this transformation was taking place. Through our enhanced senses, I could perceive the null entity approaching our local cluster of realities like a cancer spreading through a body. It existed in the spaces between dimensions, feeding on the fundamental forces that held matter together. Where it passed, stars didn't explode. They simply stopped being, leaving not even empty space behind. "Contact in 72 hours, Vex reported, his voice now carrying harmonics that indicated he was processing information from multiple timelines. "The entity has consumed realities 7 through 23. It's accelerating, but we were accelerating too." The transformation was proceeding faster than any of the previous attempts I had seen in other timelines. The collective approach was allowing us to process the changes more efficiently, though the strain on our individual psyches was enormous. I could feel myself becoming something more than human while simultaneously becoming more human than I had ever been. The perspective of 43 realities was teaching me things about existence that no single consciousness could comprehend. But it was also showing me the infinite value of each individual life across all those realities. "Sir," Hadrian's voice came from beside me, but when I turned to look at her, I saw not just the scribe I knew, but 17 variations of her from different timelines, all speaking in perfect unison. "We're receiving communication attempts from outside the facility. Source? Multiple Inquisition vessels in high orbit. They're demanding explanations for the dimensional distortions. And sir, they're charging lance batteries." I reached out with my expanding consciousness and confirmed her report. 3 Imperial Navy destroyers and an Inquisition black ship had arrived in system, their sensors screaming warnings about massive warp incursions. From their perspective, this entire world was being consumed by chaos. Time until bombardment? 47 minutes if standard protocols are followed. But sir, the dimensional distortions are affecting their navigation systems. They may fire early to prevent whatever they think is happening from spreading. The irony was overwhelming. The Imperium was about to destroy the very thing that could save it, and they would do it with complete conviction that they were serving the Emperor's will. In their defense, what we were becoming looked exactly like the kind of warp-spawned abomination that had to be destroyed before it could spread. "Can we communicate with them?" "Not through normal channels," Vex replied, "but with our enhanced capabilities." He paused as calculations ran through his mechanically augmented mind at speeds that defied physics. "I believe we could establish direct psychic contact. However, doing so would reveal the extent of our transformation." I was beginning to understand the impossible choices that had faced every previous version of myself. Every path led to tragedy of one kind or another. Save the galaxy, but lose the approval of the very people you were trying to save. Remain acceptable to human authority, but allow everything to be consumed by the null entity. Through the psychic link we shared, I felt the other volunteers reaching the same conclusions. Kruger's military pragmatism was already calculating acceptable losses. Hadrian's expanded knowledge base was providing historical precedents for necessary sacrifices. Even Vex, with his mechanical logic, was concluding that our mission superseded normal human concerns. "No," I said, surprising myself with the vehemence of the word. "We don't become the kind of beings who sacrifice humanity to save humanity. That's exactly the trap every previous attempt has fallen into." "Then what do you suggest?" asked a voice I didn't immediately recognize. One of the other volunteers, a junior acolyte whose name I hadn't learned, was looking at me with eyes that now reflected light from 17 different suns. "We save everyone," I said. "The people on this world, the crews of those ships, and the galaxy beyond. All of them." "That's impossible," Kruger stated with mechanical precision. "The variables don't support a solution where all objectives are achieved simultaneously." But even as he said it, I could feel something shifting in the dimensional matrix around us. Our combined consciousness was approaching a critical threshold where we would become capable of manipulating reality at its most fundamental level. The question was whether we could reach that point before the Inquisition ships opened fire. "Helene," I said, turning to our anchor point, "what happens if we accelerate the process?" "Unknown," she replied, but her voice carried harmonics of fear. "No previous attempt has tried to complete the transformation under time pressure. The risks of psychological fragmentation increase exponentially." "What about the risks of everyone dying in orbital bombardment?" "Also significant." Through our shared awareness, I could feel the exact moment when the Inquisition ships finished their targeting calculations. 41 minutes and 17 seconds until lance strike. But I could also feel something else. The point at which our transformation would become irreversible was only 33 minutes away. "We have a window," I announced to the group. 8 minutes, where we'll have the power to act, but before we lose the ability to understand human concerns. In those 8 minutes, we save everyone. How? Asked Hadron. I reached out with my expanding consciousness and touched the edges of the null entity's approach. It was vast, alien, and utterly inimical to existence itself. But it was also predictable, a force of nature rather than a true intelligence. Like a plague or a natural disaster, it could be understood, predicted, and potentially redirected. We don't fight it, I said. We give it something better to eat. The realization came to all 18 of us simultaneously, carried through our psychic link like wildfire. The null entity fed on existence, but not all existence was equally nutritious. Complex, organized matter provided more sustenance than simple atomic structures. Living matter was more valuable than dead matter, and conscious, aware existence. We offer ourselves, Vex said, understanding immediately. Not as a sacrifice, but as bait. Draw it into our reality, where we have home field advantage. And then, Kruger asked, then we become something it can't digest. We become observers of its consumption process, conscious witnesses to its feeding. We make ourselves inedible by becoming pure information rather than matter or energy. It was insane. It was impossible. It violated every principle of strategic thinking I had learned in 23 years of service. But it was also the only plan that offered any chance of saving everyone. 27 minutes until irreversible transformation, Helene announced. 36 minutes until orbital bombardment, Hadron added. And 71 hours until the null entity arrives, I concluded. We're going to compress 71 hours of preparation into 36 minutes, then use our enhanced abilities to save the ships that are trying to kill us. The volunteers looked at me with expressions that mixed determination with the dawning realization of just how impossibly complex our task had become. But I could feel through our psychic link that they were all committed. Whatever we had become, whatever we were still becoming, we were united in our refusal to accept failure. Begin emergency acceleration, I ordered. What happened next made the initial transformation look gentle by comparison. Dimensional energy flooded through our circle with the violence of a stellar explosion, rewriting not just our individual existence, but the fundamental nature of space-time around us. I felt my consciousness expand beyond the confines of linear thought, as 43 different versions of my decision-making process operated simultaneously. The volunteers began changing at a rate that should have been fatal. Their bodies adapted to exist in 17 dimensions, while their minds processed information from multiple timelines. But instead of fragmenting under the strain, we grew stronger, our shared purpose allowing us to maintain coherence despite the impossible complexity of our new existence. Through Vex's augmented senses, I perceived the exact moment when our transformation crossed the threshold from possible to irreversible. Through Hadron's expanded knowledge base, I understood the implications of what we had become. Through Kruger's strategic thinking, I calculated our chances of success. And through all 18 sets of enhanced senses working in concert, I felt the null entity pause in its approach as it detected something new in our local reality cluster. Something that radiated conscious awareness across multiple dimensions. Something that looked remarkably like the kind of complex, organized existence it preferred to consume. It's taking the bait, I announced unnecessarily. All 18 of us could feel the entity changing course, accelerating toward our reality with the single-minded hunger of a predator detecting prey. 47 hours until contact, Vex calculated. The acceleration is enormous. It's abandoned its consumption of the other realities to focus on us. Good. That gives those realities time to evacuate or defend themselves. I reached out with my enhanced consciousness and touched the awareness of my alternates in other timelines. Coordinate defensive efforts, share tactical information. If we fail here, make sure the lessons reach everyone else. Through the mirror that had started this entire transformation, I could see versions of myself in other realities acknowledging the plan. Some were already engaging the null entity directly. Others were attempting their own convergence transformations. A few were simply documenting everything for potential future use. But in our reality, we had one advantage the others didn't. Time pressure had forced us to maintain more of our human perspective while gaining transhuman capabilities. We understood both what we were trying to protect and what we were fighting against. 15 minutes until orbital bombardment, Hadron reported, and I'm detecting additional ships entering the system. Whatever's happening here has attracted significant Inquisition attention. Through sensors that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, I could perceive the approaching fleet. 7 Imperial Navy vessels, 3 Inquisition black ships, and something that radiated the cold authority of the Grey Knights. A full exterminatus force, assembled with remarkable speed and clearly prepared to sterilize this entire world. Time to announce ourselves, I said, and demonstrate that we're still on humanity's side. I reached out with my enhanced consciousness and established psychic contact with the lead vessel. The connection was jarring, like trying to speak to someone while simultaneously existing in 43 different conversations. But I managed to maintain coherence. Imperial vessels, this is Interrogator Thane-XVII of the Ordo Hereticus. Cease targeting of this facility. We have successfully contained a transdimensional threat and are preparing final countermeasures. The response came back immediately, though it took several seconds for my transhuman consciousness to translate it back into simple human communication patterns. This is Inquisitor Lord Valerius of the Ordo Malleus. You are broadcasting on psychic frequencies that indicate massive warp corruption. Identify yourself properly, or we will assume hostile intent. I realized the problem immediately. My psychic signature now registered as something so far beyond normal human parameters that their sensors were categorizing me as a demonic entity. From their perspective, I was exactly the kind of abomination that justified immediate planetary annihilation. Vex, I said, can you modulate our communications to appear more human? Negative, sir. Our consciousness exists in too many dimensions simultaneously. Any attempt to compress our awareness into human normal parameters would cause immediate psychological collapse. Then we demonstrate our intentions through actions rather than words. I reached out with my enhanced abilities and began solving the Inquisition fleet's immediate problems. Their navigation systems were being disrupted by dimensional distortions. Fixed. Their Geller field generators were overloading due to warp turbulence. Stabilized. Their communication systems were experiencing transdimensional interference. Cleared. Within 30 seconds, every ship in the fleet was operating at peak efficiency despite the dimensional chaos surrounding the planet. They could no longer claim they were dealing with a hostile entity. Whatever was helping them was clearly on their side. Inquisitor Lord Valerius, I broadcast again. We request permission to explain our situation in person. I believe you'll find our tactical assessment of the current threat to be illuminating. The pause was longer this time, filled with urgent consultations between ship commanders and probably emergency communications with Terra itself. Finally, Valerius responded. You will transport yourself to our flagship immediately for interrogation. Any attempt at deception or hostile action will result in immediate planetary bombardment. Understood. Preparing for transport. I turned to my fellow volunteers, seeing them now as they truly were. 18 human beings who had voluntarily transformed themselves into something beyond human comprehension, while somehow maintaining their essential humanity. Wish me luck, I said. I'm about to try explaining transdimensional ascension to people whose default response to the unexplainable is orbital bombardment. Sir, Kruger said, his military formality somehow touching despite the cosmic scope of our situation. Permission to accompany you. I suspect you may need backup. I was about to refuse when I felt the null entity's approach accelerating again. It had detected our psychic communications with the Imperial fleet and was treating them as evidence of a larger concentration of conscious beings to consume. Actually, I said, I think we're all going. Time to introduce the Imperium to its new protectors. And with that, 18 transhuman entities who had once been loyal servants of the Emperor prepared to teleport aboard an Inquisition vessel and attempt the most important diplomatic mission in galactic history. 45 hours until the null entity arrived. Everything depended on the next few minutes. Chapter 5. Dark Bargain. The teleportation process felt like being torn apart and rebuilt 17 times simultaneously while maintaining consciousness throughout the entire experience. When I materialized on the bridge of the Inquisition flagship Eternal Vigilance, I could see why the crew's first reaction was to aim every weapon in the room at me. I no longer looked entirely human. My physical form existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, creating optical illusions that made tracking my precise location difficult. When I moved, reality bent around me like heat distortion, and my eyes, according to the terrified expressions of the bridge crew, now reflected light that existed in spectrums beyond normal human perception. "Stand down!" barked Inquisitor Lord Valerius, though he kept his own bolt pistol trained on my center mass. "You claim to be Interrogator Corvin. Prove it!" 23 years of service to the Ordo Hereticus, I replied, my voice carrying harmonics that made the ship's communication systems resonate in sympathy. "Assigned to Investigation Cell Omega-7 under your direct authority 3 days ago. Currently investigating Citizen Helene Voss. Designation 7749 Alpha. Suspected of harboring unsanctioned psychic abilities." Valerius didn't lower his weapon, but I could see calculation in his eyes. Any demon or psychic entity could access that information from our records. Tell me something that wouldn't be in any official file. I considered the question carefully. What did I know about Valerius that wouldn't be documented anywhere? Then it came to me, a conversation from 8 months ago during a brief respite between investigations. You asked me why I never took promotion beyond interrogator rank despite my success rate. I told you it was because I preferred field work to administrative duties. But the real reason, which I never told anyone, was that I was afraid promotion would mean losing direct contact with the cases that mattered. Valerius slowly lowered his pistol. "Throne of Terra, it really is you. But what have you become?" "Something necessary," I replied, "and something temporary, if our plan succeeds. Lord Inquisitor, we need to evacuate this system immediately. All ships, all personnel. Within 43 hours, something is going to arrive here that will make chaos incursions look like minor disturbances." Before he could respond, the rest of my transformed volunteers materialized on the bridge around me. The sight of 18 transhuman entities suddenly appearing in the command center of an Inquisition vessel caused immediate panic among the crew. Weapons were drawn, alarms sounded, and I could feel emergency protocols activating throughout the ship. "Wait!" I commanded, my voice carrying enough authority to freeze everyone in place. "These are my people, Adept Vex, whom you've worked with for 6 years, Scribe Militant Hadron, who wrote the tactical analysis that saved 3 systems in the Mordian campaign, Guard Sergeant Kruger, who has served the Emperor faithfully for 27 years. Valerius looked from face to face, recognizing individuals he had known and trusted, now transformed into beings that existed beyond normal human parameters. "What did you do to them?" "I offered them a choice," I said simply. "Transform and fight for humanity's survival, or remain human and watch everything die." They chose to fight. Fight what? Instead of trying to explain in words, I reached out with my enhanced consciousness and established a direct psychic link with Valerius. The contact was brief, just long enough to show him a single image of the null entity and its effect on reality. The Inquisitor Lord staggered backward as if physically struck. "Throne preserve us." "What is that thing?" "Death," said Vex, his mechanical voice now carrying harmonics of absolute certainty. "Not death as humans understand it, the cessation of life. Death as the universe understands it, the cessation of existence itself. It feeds on reality and leaves nothing behind." "How long?" Valerius asked. 42 hours and 17 minutes, Hadron replied with inhuman precision. "And accelerating. Our psychic emanations have attracted its attention." I could see Valerius processing the information with the rapid-fire efficiency that had made him one of the Imperium's most effective inquisitors. The threat assessment, the strategic implications, The terrible mathematics of survival when facing something that existed outside normal physical law. "What do you need from us?" he asked. "Evacuation of all human personnel from this system," I said, "and a communication relay to Terra. If our plan fails, the Imperium needs to know what's coming. And if your plan succeeds, then humanity gains protectors who understand both human nature and transhuman necessity. We become something that can fight entities like the Null Entity while maintaining enough connection to our origins to remember why the fight matters." Valerius was quiet for a long moment, studying our transformed forms with the analytical gaze of someone trained to identify corruption and heresy. Finally, he spoke. "You're asking me to trust that 18 humans who have undergone massive psychic transformation will remain loyal to the Imperium. You're asking me to believe that beings with godlike power will choose to serve rather than rule. We're asking you to trust the same people you trusted yesterday," Kruger said, his simple soldier's logic cutting through the complexity. "We're the same individuals, sir. We've just become capable of fighting threats that normal humans can't even perceive." "Prove it," Valerius challenged. "Show me that you're still loyal servants of the Emperor." Without hesitation, all 18 of us dropped to one knee in perfect unison, our enhanced senses automatically compensating for the dimensional distortions around us. When we spoke, it was with one voice, carrying the harmonics of absolute conviction. The Emperor protects, and so do we. The effect on the bridge crew was immediate and profound. Whatever we had become, whatever powers we now wielded, we were still recognizably the same people who had sworn oaths of service to the Golden Throne. Our fundamental loyalties hadn't changed, only our ability to fulfill them. Valerius holstered his weapon completely. "What do you need?" "Time," I said, "and witnesses. If we succeed, someone needs to document what we've become and why. If we fail, someone needs to warn the galaxy about what's coming." "Granted, but I'm staying to observe personally." "Sir," I began, but he cut me off with a gesture. "Interrogator Corvin, in 23 years of service, you've never failed to identify and neutralize threats to the Imperium. I'm not about to start doubting your judgment now, regardless of what you've become. Through our psychic link, I felt the gratitude of my volunteers. They had been prepared to fight alone if necessary, but having Imperial sanction for their actions meant they could die, if necessary, still believing they served the Emperor's will." 41 hours, Vex announced. "The entity's approach vector has stabilized. It will enter our reality at the following coordinates." He transmitted the information directly to the ship's navigation systems, causing several cogitators to overload from the dimensional complexity of the data. "That's inside the system's primary star," said the ship's navigator, his voice tight with confusion. "It doesn't distinguish between matter states," Hadron explained. "Stellar plasma is just another form of organized matter to consume. But the gravitational distortions when it feeds will affect everything within 17 light hours." "Evacuation time for a full system?" Valerius asked. 63 hours minimum, Kruger calculated. "Assuming optimal conditions and no panic-related delays." "We don't have 63 hours. "No," I agreed. "Which is why we're not evacuating. We're making a stand." I could see Valerius struggling with the implications. From his perspective, I was proposing to risk every ship and every life in the system on the combat capabilities of 18 recently transformed entities of unknown power level. "What makes you think you can fight something that consumes reality itself?" "Because we've become something it can't easily digest," I explained. "Consciousness that exists across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Information patterns too complex for its feeding process to unravel quickly. And if you're wrong, then everyone dies anyway, but at least we'll have tried." Through our enhanced senses, I could feel the exact moment when Valerius made his decision. It was the same moment I had seen in 43 different Inquisitors across 43 different timelines. The point where dedication to duty overrode personal safety concerns. "Very well. All ships will remain in-system and provide whatever support you require. But I want continuous communication throughout the engagement. If it becomes clear that resistance is futile, we evacuate immediately." "Understood," I replied. "But Lord Inquisitor, there's something else you need to know. Our transformation isn't complete." "Meaning?" "We have one more choice to make, and it will determine not just whether we can fight the null entity, but who we become afterward." I reached out with my consciousness and touched the awareness of Helene Voss, still maintaining her position as anchor point in the facility below. Through her connection to multiple realities, I could see the final phase of our transformation approaching. We could become perfect warriors, optimized for fighting trans-dimensional threats, but losing our capacity for simple human emotion. We could become perfect guardians, maintaining our protective instincts, but sacrificing our ability to relate to individuals. Or we could attempt something that had never been tried before, becoming protectors who retained enough humanity to understand what they were protecting. "The choice has to be made collectively," I explained to Valerius. "All 18 of us, agreeing to accept the same risks and the same limitations. If even one of us chooses differently, the entire process becomes unstable. What are the options?" I showed him through direct psychic contact, brief glimpses of what we could become. Warriors of impossible power but alien perspective. Guardians of perfect dedication but inhuman detachment. Or something new. Protectors who bridge the gap between human limitation and transhuman capability. "The third option," Valerius said immediately, "obviously, is also the most dangerous. The failure rate approaches 90%. Most attempts result in complete psychological fragmentation. But if it succeeds, we become something that has never existed before. Beings with the power to fight cosmic threats while maintaining the wisdom to know when not to use that power." Through our psychic link, I felt my volunteers considering the choice. Each of them understood the risks and the implications. Each of them had to decide whether preserving their humanity was worth the enormous possibility of catastrophic failure. One by one, they made their decisions. Vex chose to risk everything for the chance to remain recognizably himself, while gaining the ability to protect humanity from threats that existed outside normal spacetime. Hadron chose to accept the dangers because her expanded knowledge base was showing her exactly how many realities had been lost to entities like the Null, and how few had found ways to fight back. Kruger chose the path of greatest risk because, in his words, "A soldier who won't risk himself to protect others isn't worth much as a soldier." The others followed suit, each making the same choice for their own reasons. When all 18 decisions had been registered, I felt reality begin to shift around us in preparation for the final transformation. 37 hours until entity contact, I announced. 6 hours until transformation completion. During those 6 hours, we'll be vulnerable to psychological attack, dimensional displacement, and complete existential failure. "What can we do to help?" Valerius asked. "Believe in us," I said simply. "Maintain faith that the people you trusted yesterday are still worthy of trust today. And if we fail, remember that we tried to remain human while becoming something more." I could feel the transformation beginning to accelerate as Helene channeled energy from 43 different realities into our linked consciousness. The next 6 hours would either create humanity's first line of defense against cosmic threats, or result in the spectacular failure of 18 minds trying to exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Through the viewports of the bridge, I could see reality beginning to warp as our transformation reached critical threshold. Space-time itself was bending around us as we became something that existed in the gaps between physics and possibility. 36 hours and 53 minutes, Hadron announced, her voice now carrying harmonics that made the ship's hull resonate in sympathy. The null entity was coming, and soon we would discover whether humanity's will to survive could overcome the universe's tendency toward entropy. Chapter 6. Willing Change. The final transformation began with the sound of reality singing. Every atom in my body was resonating at frequencies that existed across 17 different dimensions simultaneously, creating harmonics that caused the ship's hull to ring like a cathedral bell. Through our psychic link, I could feel my volunteers experiencing the same impossibility. consciousness expanding beyond the confines of linear existence, while somehow maintaining the core memories that made us who we were. "Structural integrity holding," reported the Eternal Vigilance's chief engineer, though his voice carried the strain of someone watching his instruments register readings that violated known physics. "Whatever you're doing down there, it's affecting matter at the quantum level." "Acknowledged," I replied, though speaking had become a complex process now that my consciousness existed in 43 states simultaneously. "Continue monitoring. If the dimensional stress threatens ship safety, withdraw to minimum safe distance." But I could feel through our enhanced awareness that withdrawal wouldn't help. The transformation was affecting space-time itself in a sphere roughly 3 light hours in diameter. If the process failed catastrophically, the resulting dimensional collapse would consume everything in the system, regardless of distance. "Status report," Valerius demanded, his Inquisitor's training overriding the natural human tendency to panic when witnessing the impossible. "Psychological cohesion at 87% and holding," Hadron replied, her expanded consciousness now processing information from multiple timelines simultaneously. "Physical adaptation proceeding within acceptable parameters. Dimensional integration approaching critical threshold. What she didn't mention was the cost." I could feel my volunteers struggling to maintain their sense of self as 43 different versions of their consciousness tried to merge into a single coherent identity. Vex's mechanical logic was keeping him stable, but the organic components of his mind were experiencing strain that would have killed a normal human. Kruger's simple soldier's determination was serving him well, but I could sense growing confusion as his strategic thinking expanded to encompass possibilities he had never imagined. The most concerning was Hadron herself. Her natural intelligence, amplified by the transformation, was approaching levels that threatened to burn out her neural pathways entirely. She was understanding too much too quickly, seeing patterns in existence that no human mind was designed to process. "Hold together," I broadcast to all of them through our psychic link. "Remember who you were. Remember why you chose this. Don't lose yourselves in what you're becoming." Their responses came back as waves of determination, mixed with growing disorientation. They were fighting to remain human while becoming something that existed outside human categories of experience. The paradox was tearing at the edges of their sanity. Through Helen's connection to multiple realities, I could see how previous attempts at this transformation had failed. In most cases, the subjects simply forgot they had ever been human, their expanded consciousness discarding individual identity as irrelevant. In others, the strain of maintaining human perspective while operating at transhuman levels caused complete psychological fragmentation. But we had one advantage the previous attempts had lacked. We were doing this together. The psychic link between us was allowing us to share the burden of transformation, each consciousness supporting the others when individual strength began to fail. 34 hours until entity contact, Vex announced, his voice now carrying mechanical precision that somehow remained recognizably his own. Our enhanced sensors are tracking its approach through 17 different reality layers simultaneously. Through those same sensors, I could see what we were preparing to fight. The null entity wasn't just large. Size was a meaningless concept for something that existed in the spaces between dimensions. It was vast in the way that infinity was vast, stretching across realities like a cancer that fed on existence itself. But I could also see its limitations. The entity was powerful, but not intelligent in any human sense. It was a force of nature, predictable in its hunger and mechanical in its consumption patterns. Like a wildfire or a plague, it could be understood, anticipated, and potentially redirected. "Analysis complete," I announced to the bridge. The entity feeds by converting organized matter into unorganized void. But the process requires time, approximately 17 minutes to fully digest something as complex as a planetary ecosystem. "You're planning to interrupt its feeding cycle," Valerius realized. "More than that, we're going to make ourselves indigestible." I reached out with my enhanced consciousness and began preparing the battlefield. Using abilities I was still learning to control, I started modifying the fundamental nature of space-time in our local area. Not changing reality, exactly, but creating zones where different physical laws applied. Interrogator! The ship's navigator spoke up, his voice tight with professional concern. The warp is behaving strangely. I'm reading currents that don't follow any known pattern. That's intentional, I explained. We're creating dimensional maze, areas where normal space-time connects to itself in impossible ways. When the entity tries to feed here, it will find itself consuming portions of its own essence. Will that destroy it? No. But it will confuse it long enough for us to attempt more direct measures. Through our psychic link, I felt my volunteers completing their individual transformations. Each of them had successfully maintained their core personality while gaining abilities that existed outside normal human parameters. Vex could now interface directly with technology across multiple realities. Hadron could access information from any timeline where the information existed. Kruger could plan and execute military strategies that spanned 17 different dimensions. But the most important change was collective. Together, we had become something unprecedented, a group consciousness that retained individual perspective while operating at transhuman levels. We were still recognizably ourselves, but we were also something entirely new. Transformation complete, I announced to Valerius. Phase 2 beginning now. What I didn't mention was that Phase 2 involved something I wasn't sure we would survive. To effectively fight the null entity, we needed to exist in the same dimensional space it occupied, which meant temporarily stepping outside normal reality entirely. All ships maintain current positions, I broadcast to the assembled fleet. Do not attempt to follow us. Do not attempt to assist. If we succeed, you'll know. If we fail, I paused, considering how to explain the implications. If we fail, evacuate immediately. Don't wait for confirmation. Where are you going? Valerius demanded. Elsewhere, I replied, to prepare the battlefield. With that, 18 transhuman entities who had once been loyal servants of the Emperor stepped outside the boundaries of normal space-time and into the dimensional realm where cosmic entities fought for the survival of reality itself. The transition felt like dying and being reborn 17 times in rapid succession while maintaining consciousness throughout the entire process. One moment we were standing on the bridge of an Imperial starship. The next we existed in a space that had no physical properties at all. No up or down, no matter or energy. Just pure information structured by will and intention. Is everyone intact? I asked through our psychic link. The responses came back as confirmation of continued existence rather than words. We were all present, all functional, all still recognizably ourselves despite existing in a realm where individual identity was a conscious choice rather than a physical necessity. Through senses that had no human equivalent, I perceived the null entity's approach. In this dimensional space, it appeared as a vast absence rather than a presence, a hole in existence that consumed information itself rather than mere matter and energy. Where it passed, the fundamental structures that allowed reality to cohere simply stopped existing. 32 hours until contact, Hadron reported, her expanded consciousness tracking the entity's movement through probability space as well as normal time. But in this dimensional realm, we have access to preparation time that doesn't exist in normal reality. She was right. One of the advantages of operating outside linear time was the ability to prepare defenses across multiple temporal states simultaneously. We could spend subjective days preparing for a battle that would last minutes in normal space-time. Begin construction of the containment matrix, I ordered. What followed was the most complex engineering project in human history, executed by beings who were no longer entirely human, but retained enough human perspective to understand what they were protecting. We began building structures out of pure information, geometric patterns that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously and were designed to redirect rather than resist the entity's consumption process. The work required absolute precision and perfect coordination. A single miscalculation could result in the containment matrix becoming food for the entity rather than a trap. But our shared consciousness allowed us to work with the kind of perfect synchronization that would have been impossible for individual minds operating independently. "First layer complete," Vex announced, after what felt like hours, but registered as seconds in normal time. "Information structure is stable across all dimensional variants. Second layer initiating," Kruger reported. "Military engineering principles adapted for trans-dimensional construction. This feels remarkably similar to building fortifications, just in 17 dimensions instead of 3. I could feel his satisfaction at discovering that his soldiers' training was still relevant, even in this impossible context. That human perspective, the ability to find familiar patterns in utterly alien circumstances, was exactly what we needed to maintain our sanity while operating at cosmic scales. "Third layer beginning," Hadron announced. "This one requires direct interface with the entity's feeding mechanism. I'm detecting interesting properties in its consumption matrix." Through our shared awareness, I felt her discovering something important. The null entity wasn't just consuming matter and energy. It was consuming the information patterns that allowed matter and energy to exist in organized forms. It was literally eating the underlying mathematics of reality. "Can we disrupt the process?" I asked. "Better than that," she replied. "We can reverse it." The revelation came to all of us simultaneously. The entity's feeding process was sophisticated but not protected against intelligent interference. By introducing specific information patterns into its consumption matrix, we could potentially force it to regurgitate realities it had already consumed. "How many?" I asked. "Unknown. But if we can establish the correct feedback loop." Hadron's consciousness expanded as she calculated possibilities across multiple timelines. "We might be able to restore everything it's consumed in the last several thousand years." The scope of what she was proposing was staggering. We weren't just talking about defeating the null entity. We were talking about undoing millennia of damage across multiple realities. "The risks?" Kruger asked with military practicality. "If we fail, we accelerate its consumption process instead of reversing it," Hadron admitted. "The entity becomes more efficient at digesting reality. What would normally take 17 minutes might be reduced to 17 seconds. And if we succeed, we become permanent guardians of the dimensional boundaries," I said, understanding the full implications. "This isn't a one-time battle. The entity will keep trying to return, and we'll need to be here to stop it, every time." Through our psychic link, I felt my volunteers processing this information. They had signed up to save humanity, but now we were discussing a commitment that would last for geological ages. We would become eternal sentinels, watching over reality itself, while humanity went about its daily life completely unaware of the cosmic threats being held at bay. "I'm in," Kruger said simply. "A soldier's duty doesn't end just because the enemy is bigger than expected." "Agreed," Vex added. "The principle of protecting humanity from threats applies regardless of the scale of those threats." One by one, the others confirmed their willingness to accept eternal duty as guardians of reality. It was exactly the kind of decision I would have expected from them. The same people who had volunteered for transformation were now volunteering for cosmic responsibility. "Containment matrix construction resuming," I announced. "Time remaining until entity contact. 29 hours, 43 minutes. We had work to do." Chapter 7. Perfect form. The containment matrix took shape around us like a three-dimensional mandala composed of pure mathematics. 17 layers of information structures, each operating according to different physical laws, all designed to redirect the null entity's consumption process back upon itself. Through our shared consciousness, I could feel the elegant complexity of what we were building. A trap that would use the entity's own power to reverse the damage it had caused. "Final layer integration beginning," I announced to my volunteers as we prepared to test our construction against forces that existed outside normal physics. "Remember, once we activate the matrix, we're committed. There won't be time for adjustments or second thoughts." Through Hadron's enhanced perception, I could see the entity approaching through dimensional space like a whole in existence that was somehow moving with purpose. 27 hours until contact. But in this realm outside linear time, we could perceive its arrival as an approaching wave of fundamental wrongness. Structural integrity confirmed across all 17 dimensional variants, Vex reported, his consciousness now interfacing directly with the mathematical foundations of our trap. The matrix will hold under theoretical maximum stress, but sir, his mechanical precision carried a note of concern that was still recognizably human. The power requirements for activation are enormous. We'll need to channel energy from sources that don't technically exist yet. Explain. The containment process requires us to manipulate temporal causality. We need to borrow power from the moment when the entity begins feeding, then use that borrowed power to prevent the feeding from occurring. It's a temporal paradox that will either work perfectly or cause a causal cascade that unmakes this entire region of space-time. I felt the familiar weight of impossible decisions settling on my shoulders. Every choice we made seemed to lead to greater risks and more complex consequences. But through our psychic link, I could also feel the determination of my volunteers. The same stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had made them good Imperial servants was now driving them to attempt something that violated several fundamental laws of physics. Alternative? Kruger asked, with characteristic military directness. Fight the entity directly, Hadron replied, after calculating possibilities across multiple timelines. Use our combined abilities to disrupt its feeding process through brute force rather than elegant redirection. Lower power requirements, but much lower chance of success. Define much lower. Approximately 7% chance of victory, 93% chance of being consumed along with everything else in this reality. And the temporal paradox approach? 87% chance of success, 13% chance of accidentally erasing ourselves from history. The mathematics were clear, but I could feel the psychological cost through our shared consciousness. My volunteers had signed up to sacrifice their lives for humanity, but now we were discussing sacrificing their very existence, erasing ourselves so thoroughly that we would never have been born. I want individual confirmations, I said. Each of you needs to decide personally whether you're willing to risk not just death, but never having existed. The responses came back through our psychic link as pure emotional commitment rather than words. From Vex, mechanical certainty that protecting humanity justified any personal cost, including retroactive non-existence. From Hadron, intellectual curiosity about whether consciousness could survive temporal erasure, combined with determination to find out empirically. From Kruger, simple soldier's logic. The mission was more important than the soldiers executing it. One by one, all 18 confirmed their willingness to risk ultimate annihilation for the chance to save reality itself. They had made the same choice they would have made as normal humans, but now they were making it while fully understanding the cosmic scope of the consequences. Matrix activation in 17 minutes, I announced, both to my volunteers and to the Imperial fleet maintaining position in normal space-time. All personnel should prepare for significant dimensional disturbance. Through our enhanced senses, I could feel Inquisitor Lord Valerius and his crews watching our activities through instruments that were barely capable of detecting what we were doing. From their perspective, 18 of their trusted allies had vanished into impossible space to fight something they couldn't see, using methods they couldn't understand. Valerius, I broadcast through normal communication channels. Status report requested. All ships holding position, he replied immediately. Sensor readings are unusual. Our instruments detect massive energy buildups, but the power sources don't appear to exist in normal space. That's correct. We're borrowing energy from a future that we're trying to prevent. If our calculations are correct, the loan will be automatically forgiven when the timeline adjusts. And if your calculations are wrong, then this entire conversation never happened because none of us will have existed to have it. There was a pause before Valerius responded, and I could imagine him processing the implications with the same methodical analysis he brought to all Inquisition work. Interrogator Corvin, in 23 years of service, your success rate has been exemplary. I'm choosing to trust that record. Thank you, sir. If we succeed, you'll receive a detailed briefing on cosmic threat assessment procedures. If we fail, I paused, considering how to phrase it diplomatically. If we fail, you'll never know we tried. Through our connection to normal space-time, I could feel the exact moment when the containment matrix reached critical activation threshold. Reality began bending around us as we prepared to perform the most complex feat of temporal engineering in galactic history. Entity contact in 7 minutes, Hadron reported. Final systems check. I reached out through our shared consciousness and verified the status of each component. 17 layers of mathematical structures, all operating perfectly. 43 temporal anchor points, all stable. 18 transhuman consciousnesses, all maintaining coherent identity despite existing outside normal physics. All systems optimal, I confirmed. Initiate paradox sequence. What happened next felt like being inside an equation while it solved itself. Energy that wouldn't exist until the future began flowing backward through time to power systems that existed in the present to prevent that future from occurring. The logical impossibility of it should have caused immediate causal collapse, but somehow our enhanced consciousnesses were sophisticated enough to maintain the paradox through pure force of will. Energy cascade initiated, Vex announced. Power levels rising to theoretical maximum, temporal buffers holding steady. Through sensors that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, I could perceive the null entity's approach with perfect clarity. It was vast beyond comprehension, but it was also entirely predictable, a force of nature that followed specific patterns in its consumption process. Contact in 4 minutes, Hadron reported. Entity is maintaining expected approach vector. No indication it's detected our preparations. That was exactly what we needed. The containment matrix would only work if the entity followed its normal feeding pattern. If it detected our trap and adapted its consumption method, our carefully calculated countermeasures would become useless. All stations ready, I announced. Remember, once the entity begins feeding, we'll have exactly 17 minutes to complete the reversal process. If we miss the window, there won't be another chance. Through our psychic link, I felt my volunteers acknowledging the timeline with the grim determination of soldiers preparing for a battle they might not survive. But I could also feel something else, a sense of completion, as if everything in their lives had been leading to this moment. Contact in 90 seconds, Hadron announced. I reached out with my enhanced consciousness and touched the awareness of my alternates in other realities. Across 43 different timelines, versions of myself were attempting the same desperate gambit. Some had already succeeded. Others had failed catastrophically, but all of them were fighting the same battle with the same determination. Contact in 60 seconds, through the containment matrix. I could feel space-time beginning to distort as the entity's presence affected the fundamental structures of reality. Stars in the surrounding systems flickered as their nuclear fusion processes were momentarily disrupted by the approach of something that consumed the mathematical relationships that allowed matter to cohere. Contact in 30 seconds. I could see now why previous attempts to fight the entity had failed so consistently. It wasn't just powerful, it was antithetical to the very concept of organized resistance. Fighting it was like trying to use fire to extinguish fire, or using darkness to illuminate shadow. The only way to defeat something that consumed existence was to make existence itself into a weapon. Contact in 10 seconds. Through our shared consciousness, I felt all 18 of my volunteers preparing for the moment when theory would meet reality. We had built our trap using mathematics that existed outside normal physics. We had borrowed power from futures that might never occur. We had transformed ourselves into beings that bridged the gap between human limitation and cosmic necessity. Contact. The null entity touched our reality like a drop of universal acid hitting the surface of existence itself. Stars began going out as their fundamental structure was consumed. Planets became empty shells as the relationships between their atoms were devoured. The very fabric of space-time started unraveling as the entity began its feeding process. And in that moment of ultimate dissolution, our containment matrix activated. Instead of consuming our reality, the entity found itself consuming the mathematical structures we had prepared for it. Instead of feeding on existence, it began feeding on information patterns that had been specifically designed to redirect its consumption process back upon itself. Matrix stable, Vex reported with mechanical precision that couldn't quite hide his amazement. The entity is consuming the trap exactly as calculated. Through our enhanced senses, I could perceive the reversal process beginning. The entity's feeding mechanism, designed to convert organized matter into void, was being forced to operate in reverse. Realities it had consumed over millennia were being regurgitated back into existence as the trap forced it to reverse its own digestive process. Temporal cascade initiating, Hadron announced. We're detecting restoration events across 17 different reality clusters. Civilizations that were consumed thousands of years ago are being restored to their moment of destruction. The scope of what we were accomplishing was beyond anything I had imagined. We weren't just saving our own reality, we were undoing millennia of destruction across multiple dimensions simultaneously. But the process was also putting enormous strain on our consciousness. Maintaining the paradox required us to exist in multiple temporal states simultaneously while processing information from realities that were being created and destroyed and recreated in rapid succession. Psychological cohesion at 67% and declining, I announced to my volunteers. Hold together, we're almost through. Through our psychic link, I could feel them struggling to maintain individual identity while their consciousness expanded to encompass cosmic scales. Vex's mechanical logic was keeping him stable, but his organic components were experiencing strain that threatened complete neural collapse. Hadron's intelligence was approaching levels that were burning out her neural pathways. Kruger's simple determination was the only thing keeping him coherent as strategic possibilities expanded beyond human comprehension. 11 minutes remaining, I announced. Entity reversal at 43% completion. I could see through our enhanced senses that the process was working. The null entity was being forced to disgorge everything it had consumed, but the effort was also causing it to fragment into smaller components. Instead of one cosmic threat, we were creating dozens of smaller entities that would be easier to contain individually. Sir? Kruger's voice carried strain but maintained its characteristic military precision. The smaller fragments are dispersing across multiple realities. We can't contain them all simultaneously. We don't need to, I replied, seeing the final phase of our plan with crystal clarity. We just need to prevent them from reforming into a single entity. Through our connection to multiple timelines, I reached out and began coordinating with alternate versions of myself across different realities. Together, we could establish a permanent monitoring system. 18 consciousnesses in each reality, all working together to track and contain the entity fragments before they could reunite. Phase 3, initiating, I announced. Permanent Guardian Protocol. My volunteers understood immediately. We wouldn't be returning to normal human existence after this battle. We would become eternal sentinels, watching over the dimensional boundaries to ensure that threats like the null entity could never again threaten organized existence. 5 minutes remaining, Hadron announced. Reversal process at 89% completion. All major reality clusters restored. Through the containment matrix, I could perceive the entity's final moments as a unified consciousness. It was fragmenting into component pieces that would spread across multiple dimensions, each too small to threaten entire realities, but still requiring constant vigilance to prevent reunion. Final phase, I announced to both my volunteers and the Imperial fleet still maintaining position in normal spacetime. Entity fragmentation in 60 seconds. When it came, the fragmentation was beautiful and terrible simultaneously. The null entity exploded into thousands of smaller pieces, each one carrying a fragment of its original hunger, but lacking the coordination to pose an existential threat. The pieces scattered across dimensional space like seeds from a dying plant, each one seeking a reality where it could take root and begin growing again. Dispersion complete, I announced. Primary threat neutralized. But even as I said it, I could feel the weight of what came next. Those fragments would spend eternity trying to reunite, and we would spend eternity making sure they failed. We had won the battle. Now came the eternal war. Chapter 8. Warriors Born. The aftermath of victory felt like standing in the eye of a cosmic hurricane. Around us, reality was reassembling itself from the fragments the null entity had regurgitated. But the process was chaotic and required constant guidance to prevent catastrophic restructuring. Through our enhanced consciousness, I could perceive 17 different dimensions simultaneously stabilizing, while 43 alternate timelines integrated their restored realities. Entity fragments dispersed across 14,147 different dimensional zones, Hadron reported, her expanded awareness tracking each piece with mathematical precision. Individual threat level, minimal to moderate. Collective threat level if reunification occurs. Extinction level event. Time until natural fragment decay? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would be measured in geological epochs. Unknown. The fragments appear to be self-sustaining. They will persist indefinitely unless actively eliminated, which meant our vigil would be eternal. We had saved reality, but the price was becoming permanent guardians who could never rest, never relax, never again enjoy the simple pleasures of unenhanced human existence. Through our psychic link, I felt my volunteers processing this realization with the same grim acceptance they had shown throughout our transformation. They had volunteered to save humanity, and if eternal vigilance was the price of that salvation, they would pay it without complaint. Status report to Fleet Command, I announced, opening communication channels to normal space-time. Primary objective achieved, cosmic threat neutralized, reality restored to stable configuration. Inquisitor Lord Valerius's response came immediately. Acknowledged. Are you still you? It was a profound question that cut to the heart of what we had become. I could perceive existence across multiple dimensions simultaneously. I could process information from 43 different timelines. I could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality with conscious thought. But was I still Matthias Corvin, interrogator of the Ordo Hereticus? Yes, I replied after careful consideration. And no, we're still the same people who volunteered for this mission, but we've become something more, something that exists outside normal human categories, but retains human motivation and human values. Can you return? Can you resume normal duties? Our duties have changed, I said simply. But our loyalty to the Imperium and our dedication to protecting humanity remain absolute. We're just protecting them from threats that exist outside normal space-time now. Through our enhanced senses, I could perceive the relief and gratitude emanating from the Imperial fleet. They understood that 18 of their trusted allies had sacrificed their humanity to save everyone else. But I could also sense their unease. We had become something beyond their understanding, and that made us as frightening as we were necessary. What happens now? Valerius asked. Now we establish permanent monitoring stations across the affected dimensions, I explained. We track the entity fragments and prevent reunification attempts. We watch for other cosmic threats that might emerge from outside normal reality. And we serve as humanity's first line of defense against things that shouldn't exist. Will we see you again? The question carried personal weight that transcended official duty. These were people we had served alongside for years, relationships built on mutual trust and shared sacrifice. They were asking whether our transformation had severed those connections permanently. Occasionally, I replied. When cosmic threats manifest in normal space-time, we'll coordinate with Imperial forces. When reality requires stabilization after dimensional incidents. But our primary existence will be in spaces between realities, watching for dangers that most humans can't perceive. I could feel Valerius struggling with the implications. From his perspective, he had just lost 18 valuable agents while gaining 18 guardians whose capabilities he couldn't fully understand. It was exactly the kind of ambiguous victory that characterized most successful Inquisition operations. "Do you need anything from us?" he asked finally. "Documentation," Hadron interjected before I could respond. "Complete records of our transformation process, our capabilities, and our limitations. If similar threats emerge in other sectors, the knowledge could be vital. And witnesses, Kruger added with military pragmatism. Someone needs to remember what happened here. Someone needs to be able to explain to future Imperial commands why certain dimensional anomalies shouldn't be investigated too closely. They were right. What we had become was unprecedented, and the Imperium would need to understand how to work with transhuman guardians who retained human loyalty. More importantly, they would need to know when not to interfere with cosmic-scale threats that required abilities beyond normal human limits. Recording everything, Valerius confirmed. Full tactical analysis, psychological profiles, capability assessments. This will become a classified addendum to the Inquisition's xenological databases. Sir, one of my volunteers spoke up, junior acolyte Marcus, whose transformation had given him the ability to perceive temporal paradoxes directly. I'm detecting communication attempts from elsewhere. Other Guardian groups across the galaxy are requesting coordination protocols. Through our enhanced awareness, I could sense what he meant. Our success had inspired similar transformation attempts in other sectors. Across the galaxy, small groups of volunteers were undergoing their own ascension processes to deal with cosmic threats that the Imperium couldn't handle through conventional means. How many? I asked. 47 confirmed groups in various stages of transformation. Most are adapting our methodology, but adjusting for local threats. We appear to have started a movement. The implications were staggering. If successful, we would see the emergence of an entirely new category of Imperial service, transhuman guardians who operated beyond normal military or Inquisition authority, but remained loyal to the Emperor's vision of human survival and prosperity. Establish communication protocols, I ordered. Share tactical data and transformation procedures. If we're going to have cosmic guardians throughout the galaxy, we need to ensure they maintain both human perspective and Imperial loyalty. Yes, sir. But sir, some of the groups are reporting different outcomes. Not everyone who attempts our transformation process retains their humanity. That was the risk we had always known existed. The transformation that had allowed us to fight cosmic threats while remaining essentially human was inherently unstable. Other groups, facing different pressures or making different choices, might become something more alien. Monitor those situations carefully, I said. If any Guardian groups show signs of losing their connection to human values, we may need to intervene. The thought of fighting other transhuman entities was sobering, but it was also inevitable. Power without accountability always led to corruption, and cosmic power without human limitations could lead to threats as dangerous as the ones we were sworn to protect against. Guardians watching the Guardians, Vex observed with mechanical irony. The eternal problem of Imperial security, simply operating at a larger scale. Through our psychic link, I could feel the weight of infinite responsibility settling on all our shoulders. We had solved the immediate crisis, but in doing so, we had become permanent fixtures in the cosmic order. We would spend eternity vigilant against threats that most humans would never know existed. But I could also feel something else through our shared consciousness: satisfaction. We had volunteered to save humanity, and we had succeeded. The cost was enormous, but the alternative had been universal extinction. Given those options, we had made the only choice possible. Final status report, I announced to the Imperial fleet. The immediate threat has been neutralized. Reality is stable. Humanity is safe to continue its expansion across the galaxy. But cosmic threats will continue to emerge, and when they do, we'll be ready. Understood, Valerius replied. And Interrogator Corvin, Matthias, thank you. All of you. The Imperium is in your debt. The debt is to humanity itself, I corrected. We serve the same cause we always served. We just serve it from a different perspective now. Through our enhanced senses, I could perceive the Imperial fleet preparing to return to normal patrol duties. They would carry word of what had happened here to other sectors, other commanders, other inquisitors who might one day face similar impossible choices. But for us, the mission was just beginning. Across the galaxy, cosmic threats were stirring. In dimensions beyond normal human perception, entities that existed outside the laws of physics were turning their attention toward the reality we protected. And in the spaces between realities, the fragments of the null entity continued their eternal attempts to reunite. Guardian Stations 1 through 17, reporting ready for eternal watch, I announced to my volunteers. All dimensional monitoring systems operational. Fragment tracking at 100% efficiency. Sir, Kruger's military formality remained unchanged despite his transhuman transformation. Request permission to establish patrol schedules. Even cosmic guardians need to maintain operational discipline. I felt a surge of affection for the simple soldier who had volunteered to become something beyond human comprehension while retaining his commitment to proper military procedure. He was right. Eternal vigilance required eternal organization. Permission granted, Sergeant. Establish rotating patrol schedules for all 17-dimensional zones. Maintain constant communication between all Guardian positions. And remember, we're still Imperial servants. We maintain Imperial standards regardless of our current, unusual circumstances. Yes, sir. Patrol Schedule Alpha initiating immediately. Through our psychic link, I felt my volunteers taking up their positions as eternal sentinels. Spread across 17 dimensions, they would watch for threats that existed outside normal space-time while maintaining enough human perspective to remember why their vigil mattered. But even as we settled into our new roles, I could perceive something else stirring in the cosmic deep. The destruction of the null entity had sent ripples across multiple reality layers, attracting the attention of other entities that existed in the spaces between dimensions. Some were curious, others were hungry. A few radiated the kind of malevolent intelligence that suggested they were already planning to test our defenses. New contacts detected, Hadron announced with the clinical precision of someone cataloging cosmic threats. Multiple entities approaching from outside our local reality cluster. Estimated arrival time, 3 standard years. Threat assessment. Unknown. They appear to be scouts for something larger, much larger. I felt the familiar weight of impossible decisions settling on my shoulders once again. We had defeated one cosmic threat only to attract the attention of others. Our victory had marked humanity as a species capable of defending itself against existential dangers, which meant we would continue to face existential dangers for as long as we existed. All Guardians maintain alert status, I announced. It seems our real work is just beginning. Through our enhanced consciousness, I could perceive the shape of the eternal war we had committed ourselves to fighting. Cosmic threats would continue to emerge from outside reality. Guardian groups would continue to form to meet those threats. And somewhere in the balance between human limitation and transhuman capability, the future of conscious existence would be determined. But for now, reality was stable. Humanity was safe. And 18 former Imperial servants stood eternal watch over the dimensions that surrounded normal space-time, ready to face whatever emerged from the cosmic dark. The mirror had answered back, showing us reflections of what we could become when humanity faced impossible choices. We had chosen to become Guardians while remaining human enough to remember what we guarded. It was, I realized, exactly what the Emperor would have wanted us to choose. Through our psychic link, my volunteers confirmed their readiness for eternal service. Across the galaxy, new Guardian groups prepared to face their own transformations. And in the spaces between realities, we began our watch against threats that existed beyond human imagination. The real war was just beginning. But for the first time in galactic history, humanity had protectors who could fight that war while remembering why it mattered. We were still human. We were finally more than human. And we were exactly what the universe needed us to become.